No one is born insecure. No baby looks in the mirror and says, "I'm not good enough." No child takes their first steps and thinks, "Maybe I shouldn't try again." We're not born doubting ourselves. We learn it. So here's the real question: if confidence is our natural state, why do so many of us grow up feeling insecure, small, and not enough? Where does that voice come from? The one that tells us we can't, we shouldn't, we're not ready, we're not good enough. The answer is simple but difficult to accept. We learned it. Somewhere along the way, someone taught us to doubt ourselves. Maybe it was a parent who said, "Don't dream too big." Maybe it was a teacher who compared us to the kids sitting next to us. Maybe it was a group of friends who laughed when we tried and failed. Slowly, piece by piece, moment by moment, the message began to stick. Not because it was true, but because we believed the repetition. We internalized it. Insecurity isn't a truth, it's conditioning. It's a program installed in us by the experiences we lived, the people we trusted, and the words we allowed to shape us. That means the voice of insecurity doesn't belong to you. It's not your identity. It's an echo of someone else's judgment that you accidentally carried as your own. I once knew a guy who was terrified of speaking in public. All through school, every time he opened his mouth, he stumbled and people laughed. Over time, he stopped raising his hand. He stopped volunteering. He convinced himself, "I'm just not good at this." Years later, his boss asked him to lead a meeting. He panicked, but he had no choice. His voice cracked, his palms were sweating, he stuttered. But here's what happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked him. They leaned in. They respected that he had the courage to stand there. When it ended, they applauded. And for the first time, he realized maybe the voice in his head wasn't telling the truth. Maybe the story he had believed for so long wasn't his to carry. That's the shift. That's where overcoming insecurity begins. The moment you understand that doubt is learned, you also understand it can be unlearned. You're not broken. You're not flawed. You've just been carrying someone else's script for too long. And if you can learn to internalize negativity, you can also train yourself to internalize evidence of your strength. Every time you do the thing insecurity tells you not to do, speak up when you want to stay quiet, try again when you want to quit, put yourself out there when you want to hide, you're teaching yourself a new story. You're proving little by little that you were capable all along. Insecurity will still whisper, but the more evidence you collect, the quieter that voice becomes. The truth is, we all stumble, we all fail, we all get laughed at, rejected, and misunderstood. But that doesn't make us inadequate, it makes us human. And when you stop seeing insecurity as who you are and start seeing it as something you were taught, you gain the freedom to unlearn it. Confidence isn't about pretending you're perfect. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to doubt. Have you ever noticed that self-doubt doesn't always show up when you're failing? Sometimes it shows up when you're doing fine, when you're living your life, working your job, showing up every day. And yet, something inside you whispers, "You're not enough." That voice doesn't come from failure. It comes from comparison. It comes from standing in the gap between who you really are and who you think you're supposed to be. That's where insecurity lives. It lives in the space between reality and expectation, between authenticity and performance, between truth and perception. We convince ourselves that we should be smarter, stronger, richer, more attractive, more talented, more confident. And every time we compare ourselves to that imaginary version, we lose. Not because we're not good enough, but because the standard we're holding ourselves to isn't real. Think about social media. We scroll through highlight reels of people's lives. Vacations, promotions, perfect relationships, perfect bodies. And then we look at ourselves sitting on the couch in sweatpants and the gap widens. Suddenly, the voice says, "See, look at them. You don't measure up." But here's the problem: we're comparing our behind, the scenes with someone else's edited movie trailer. No wonder we feel small. Self-doubt thrives in that gap. It convinces us that we're falling behind, that everyone else has it figured out, that we're somehow missing the mark. But the truth is, there's no mark. There's no scoreboard. There's no universal definition of enough. The only reason self-doubt has so much power is because we've agreed to live by someone else's measure. I remember talking to a young woman who was excelling in her career. Objectively, she was doing great. She had promotions, recognition, respect from her peers. But when she looked in the mirror, all she could see were the ways she didn't measure up to her ideal. She told me, "I don't feel successful. I feel like I'm faking it." She wasn't failing. She was comparing herself to a version of herself that didn't exist. That gap between reality and expectation was where her doubt lived. So how do we close that gap? It starts with honesty, with asking yourself, who am I really? What do I actually want? What am I pretending to want? Because I think it's what people expect from me. The more aligned you are with your authentic self, the less room insecurity has to grow. Because the truth is, most of our doubt isn't about who we are. It's about who we're trying to be for someone else. Here's the irony. The very people you're trying to impress, the ones you think are measuring you, are also wrestling with their own self-doubt. They're doing the same thing you're doing, comparing themselves to an impossible standard. Nobody has it all figured out. Nobody feels enough all the time. The difference is that some people stop chasing an image and some don't. When you start closing that gap, when you begin choosing authenticity over perfection, you realize that doubt loses its grip because you're no longer living by an imaginary script. You're living by your truth. And in your truth, there's no need for comparison. There's only growth. There's only progress. There's only you becoming a little stronger, a little wiser, a little more resilient each day. Self-doubt will always try to creep back in. It will whisper that you should be further ahead, that you should look different, that you should have more figured out by now. But when you know who you are, when you accept yourself fully, you stop asking, am I enough compared to them? And start asking, am I growing compared to who I was yesterday? That's the only comparison that matters. The gap doesn't define you. You define the gap. And the moment you stop living for the version of yourself you think you should be, you begin to embrace the version of yourself you already are. We often talk about confidence like it's something you're either born with or you're not. Some people seem to walk into a room and own it, while others shrink into the background. But here's the truth: confidence isn't magic. It's not luck. It's not some genetic gift. Confidence is built. And the foundation it's built on isn't positive thinking, it's evidence. Think about it this way: you can tell yourself all day long, I'm confident, I'm confident, I'm confident. But if you've never proven it to yourself through action, your brain won't buy it. It's like standing in front of a mirror and saying you can play the piano when you've never touched the keys. Words don't build confidence. Evidence does. Proof does. I once had a friend who was terrified of public speaking. The idea of standing in front of a group and talking made her heart race, her palms sweat, her stomach turn. For years, she avoided it, but she also wished she could be confident. She read self-help books, repeated affirmations, and even tried visualizations, but nothing worked. Why? Because confidence doesn't come from wishing, it comes from doing. So she made a choice. She started small. Instead of throwing herself into a massive stage event, she volunteered to speak in front of 5 people. It was messy. She stumbled over her words. Her voice shook. But she got through it. That became her first piece of evidence. She told herself, I didn't die, I did it. The next time, she spoke to 10 people, then 20, then 50. Each time, she collected more evidence that she could survive, that she could improve, that she could actually do the thing she thought was impossible. Today, she's one of the most confident speakers I know. Not because she was born that way, but because she built her confidence on a mountain of proof. This is how confidence works. It's not about pretending you're fearless. It's about proving to yourself over and over again that you can survive the things you're afraid of. Every small act of courage becomes another brick in the foundation. The more bricks you stack, the stronger your confidence becomes. The mistake most of us make is waiting for confidence before we act. We think, once I feel confident, I'll speak up in that meeting. Once I feel confident, I'll ask for that promotion. Once I feel confident, I'll try that new thing. But confidence doesn't show up first. Courage does. Confidence is the reward you get after you've taken the risk. It's like going to the gym. You don't walk in on day 1 and expect to lift 200 pounds. You start small. You build strength over time. Confidence works the same way. It's a muscle, not a gift. And the only way to strengthen it is to use it. To put yourself in situations where you might fail, where you might stumble, where you might look silly. Because even in failure, you're still collecting evidence. You're still proving to yourself that you can handle it. And here's the beautiful part: the more evidence you gather, the quieter self-doubt becomes. Doubt thrives on inaction. It feeds on the fact that you haven't proven it wrong yet. But every time you take a step forward, you give doubt less ground to stand on. You're essentially saying, I've been here before and I made it through. I can do it again. Confidence doesn't mean you won't feel nervous. It doesn't mean you won't have doubts. It means you've built enough evidence to know that even when those feelings show up, you can still move forward. You've trained yourself to trust your ability to figure things out as you go. So the question isn't, how do I become confident? The question is, what small step can I take today that proves I'm capable? Because every step you take is another piece of evidence. And over time, evidence becomes belief. Belief becomes trust. Trust becomes confidence. Confidence isn't something you wait for. It's something you earn. Have you ever noticed how spending time with certain people makes you feel bigger, stronger, more alive, while spending time with others makes you feel smaller, insecure, and less capable? That's not an accident. It's not just about personality differences. It's about influence. The company you keep is shaping your self-belief, whether you realize it or not. Here's the truth: human beings are social creatures. Our brains are wired for connection, which means we don't form our self-image in isolation. We form it in response to the people around us. If you're constantly surrounded by voices that criticize, dismiss, or belittle you, it's only a matter of time before you start believing those voices. If the people around you see you as weak, as not enough, as incapable, eventually you'll see yourself that way too. I once had a conversation with someone who felt completely stuck in life. They told me, I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough. I feel like I'm just wasting time. When I asked who they spent most of their time with, their answer explained everything. They were surrounded by friends and colleagues who always focused on what was missing. People who pointed out flaws more than progress. People who couldn't celebrate wins without immediately comparing them to something bigger. No wonder this person felt small. Every mirror they looked into reflected inadequacy. Now, let me be clear, it's not surrounding yourself with people who only flatter you or tell you what you want to hear. Growth requires challenge. But there's a difference between someone who challenges you because they believe in your potential and someone who cuts you down because they don't see your worth. One pushes you higher. The other keeps you stuck at the bottom. Think about athletes. A runner doesn't train with people who mock their pace. They train with people who run alongside them, sometimes a little ahead, sometimes a little behind, but always pushing toward the same goal. Why? Because environment fuels performance. The same is true in life. Your confidence, your resilience, your self-worth, they're not just products of your inner dialogue. They're reflections of the environment you choose to place yourself in. If you want to overcome insecurity and self-doubt, you need to pay attention to your circle. Who gets a seat at your table? Who gets access to your mind and heart? Because those voices become your inner voice. If you surround yourself with people who see the best in you, who remind you of your strengths when you forget, who push you to rise when you stumble, your self-belief grows. But if you keep company with cynics, critics, and people who diminish your dreams, you're building your self-image on toxic soil. Sometimes, overcoming insecurity isn't about fixing yourself. Sometimes, it's about changing your environment. Because the truth is, you can only carry so much weight on your own. If the people around you keep piling on more doubt, more criticism, more negativity, eventually it breaks you. But if the people around you are lifting, encouraging, challenging with love instead of judgment, you rise higher than you ever thought possible. And here's the hard part: this often means making difficult choices. It means letting go of relationships that drain you, even if they've been in your life for years. It means saying no to conversations that only revolve around gossip, comparison, and criticism. It means being intentional about who you give your time and energy to. Because your self-belief is too valuable to let just anyone shape it. We like to think self-confidence is a solo project, something you build entirely from within. But the truth is, we become who we surround ourselves with. If you want to change how you see yourself, start by changing who you stand next to. The company you keep is either reinforcing your insecurities or rewriting them. And the choice of which direction it goes, that's in your hands. We live in a culture that worships success and hides failure. Everywhere we look, people are showing the highlight reel, the wins, the promotions, the breakthroughs, the celebrations. And when all you see is success, failure starts to feel like a personal flaw. You mess up, and instead of thinking, that's part of growth, you think something's wrong with me. But let me tell you, the truth, failure isn't proof of inadequacy. It's proof of courage. Think about it. Who never fails? The person who never tries. The person who never risks. The person who plays it safe, stays in their comfort zone, and avoids challenges. If you're failing, it means you're doing something most people are too afraid to do. You're stepping out. You're taking risks. You're daring to test your limits. Failure isn't a sign that you're weak. It's evidence that you were brave enough to show up. I once knew a young entrepreneur who started a business with every ounce of passion he had. He poured his savings, his energy, his late nights, his weekends into it. And after 2 years, it collapsed. He felt crushed. He said to me, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I don't have what it takes." But when we really looked at it, the failure didn't mean he was inadequate. It meant he had the courage to put himself on the line while everyone else sat on the sidelines. He walked away with lessons no textbook could ever teach. And those lessons, they became the foundation for the business he built later, the one that actually thrived. That's the paradox of failure. It hurts in the moment, but it plants the seeds of growth. It exposes the areas we need to strengthen. It humbles us enough to learn. And if we pay attention, failure becomes the raw material of confidence. Because once you've failed and survived, the fear of failure loses some of its power. You realize, I can fall and get back up again. That knowledge makes you braver the next time. Insecurity tells us failure is final. It whispers, "See, you weren't good enough." That mistake defines you. But failure doesn't define you. It refines you. It sharpens you. It teaches you resilience, adaptability, persistence. Nobody ever became strong by winning all the time. They became strong by falling, by hurting, by questioning themselves, and then standing back up anyway. Look at history's greatest innovators, leaders, creators. Every single one of them failed many times. Thomas Edison tried thousands of times before he found the right filament for the light bulb. Imagine if he had stopped after the first failure, or the 10th, or the 100th. Failure wasn't proof that he couldn't invent. It was proof that he was committed enough, courageous enough, to keep going until he found the answer. So when you fail, don't ask, "What's wrong with me?" Ask, "What did I just learn about myself? What did this experience teach me about courage?" Because failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the path to success. The people who win big are the ones willing to lose big along the way. And here's something you need to hear: the people who criticize your failures, who laugh at your mistakes, who use your setbacks as evidence against you, they're not the ones in the arena. They're spectators. They're the ones too afraid to risk, too afraid to try. Their judgment says more about their insecurity than about your ability. Because the ones who know what it takes, the ones who've walked through their own failures, will never mock yours. They'll respect it. Failure is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's a reflection of your willingness to show up when you didn't have a guarantee. And that willingness, that's courage. That's strength. That's what separates the ones who live timid lives from the ones who build extraordinary ones. The only real failure is refusing to try. Everything else is progress in disguise. Here's a question most people never ask: why do we chase confidence in the first place? For many, it's about wanting to feel better than others, to feel strong, attractive, accomplished, because then, in comparison, we'll feel worthy. But that kind of confidence is fragile. The moment someone looks better, achieves more, or moves faster, your confidence collapses. That's because it was built on comparison, not on something solid. True confidence doesn't come from stacking yourself against others. It comes from service. Think about the times in your life when you felt most alive, most secure, most certain of yourself. Chances are it wasn't when you were showing off. It wasn't when you were trying to prove you were better. It was when you were helping someone. It was when you were adding value to someone's life, lifting them up, guiding them, or simply being there when they needed you. Why? Because when we shift our focus from "how do I look" to "how can I help," insecurity loses its grip. I remember speaking with a young man who constantly battled self-doubt. He said, I walk into a room and feel like everyone is judging me, like I don't belong. I told him, stop focusing on how you look in the room. Start asking what the room needs from you. Walk in and think, how can I make this better for someone else? Months later, he told me it changed everything. The moment he shifted his attention away from himself and onto service, his fear disappeared. His confidence grew because it was no longer about him. It was about the people he was serving. That's the paradox. The more we obsess over ourselves, the less confident we feel. The more we focus on others, the stronger we become. Because service pulls us out of our own head. It silences the voice of doubt. It gives us a role, a purpose, a reason to show up. And nothing builds confidence like knowing you're needed. Compare that to the endless cycle of comparison. You look at someone else's success, and instead of being inspired, you feel inadequate. You see someone else's beauty, and instead of appreciating it, you tear yourself down. Comparison makes life a competition, and in a competition, someone always loses. Even when you're on top, it's temporary. Sooner or later, someone else will outrun you, outshine you, outwork you. If your confidence is built on comparison, it will always be at risk. But service is different. Service is infinite. There's always someone to help, someone to encourage, someone to guide. Confidence rooted in service is unshakable because it's not about you being the best. It's about you being useful. And usefulness never goes out of style. Think of the leaders we admire most. It's not their wealth or their achievements that inspire us. It's their ability to give, to sacrifice, to serve a vision greater than themselves. True confidence is knowing you have something to contribute, no matter the setting, no matter who else is in the room. And the best part, you don't need to compare yourself to anyone to do it. If you want to overcome insecurity and self-doubt, stop asking, am I enough compared to them? And start asking, how can I serve with what I have today? Because when you're serving, you're no longer trapped in the prison of self-consciousness. You're free. You're focused. You're confident, not because of how you look or what you achieve, but because you know your presence matters. Confidence built on comparison will always be fragile. Confidence built on service will always be strong, because service shifts the focus from proving yourself to improving someone else's life. And that's the kind of confidence that can't be shaken. Insecurity and self-doubt are not permanent parts of who we are. They're learned, they're shaped, they're influenced. We weren't born questioning our worth. We picked it up along the way. And because it was learned, it can be unlearned. Self-doubt creeps in when we stand in the gap between who we are and who we think we should be. It thrives in comparison. But the way out isn't to close that gap by trying harder. It's to step out of the game altogether, to stop living by someone else's measure and start living by our own truth. Confidence doesn't come from wishes or affirmations. It comes from evidence. From proving to ourselves one small act of courage at a time that we are capable. And that evidence stacks up until one day you look back and realize the fear that used to control you no longer has the same power. But we don't build belief in isolation. The company we keep shapes our self-image. The voices around us become the voice inside us. And if we want to believe in ourselves, we need to choose carefully who we let speak into our lives. And when we fail, because we will, it's not proof of inadequacy. It's proof of courage. It's proof that we were brave enough to try when others held back. Failure doesn't define us, it refines us. It makes us stronger, sharper, more resilient. And the deepest form of confidence, it's not about comparison at all. It's about contribution. When we shift the focus from, do I look good enough, to, how can I serve? How can I help? Insecurity loses its grip. Because real confidence doesn't come from being the best in the room. It comes from being useful in the room. So, overcoming insecurity and self-doubt isn't about waking up one day and never feeling them again. It's about building the practices, the mindset, and the environment that allow us to keep showing up anyway. It's about courage over fear, truth over comparison, service over ego. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need a perfect version of you. It needs